Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting to something really fascinating, the Enigma machine.
Ah, yes. The device that, well, essentially held secrets captive during a huge chunk of the 20th century.
Exactly. It wasn't just some gadget. Nazi Germany relied on it heavily. World War II, top secret communications, all military branches. They thought it was totally secure.
And you can see why they might have thought that initially. The concept was quite elegant in its way, an electromechanical system.
Electromechanical, how did that work, basically?
Think of it like a very complex typewriter. It used these rotating rotors, to scramble the alphabet.
Yeah.
You type in your message, the plain text.
Uh-huh.
And the machine, through these rotors, spits out encrypted letters, the ciphertext, usually shown on little lamps that lit up.
Okay.
But the real trick, the thing that made it seem so strong, was that the internal connections, the way it scrambled things, changed with every single letter you typed.
Ah, okay, so it wasn't static, like A doesn't always become, say, Q.
Precisely, not at all.
Yeah.
It was dynamic. The electrical path shifted constantly.
So if you typed A 5 times.
You'd probably get 5 different encrypted letters lighting up. Made things like frequency analysis, looking for common letters, almost useless.
Right. I can see why the Germans felt pretty confident then. What was their security strategy based on?
Well, it was layered. First, the machine's internal settings were changed every day, based on these secret key lists they distributed.
Okay, daily keys.
Yeah. And on top of that, each message had its own specific settings too. So to read a message, the receiver needed both the daily key and those message-specific settings.
Without that exact recipe for the day, you were just stuck with gibberish.
Pretty much completely lost, yes. They really believed this combination made it unbreakable.
But as the title of our deep dive suggests, unbreakable wasn't quite accurate, was it? The fortress, it had cracks.
It absolutely did. Despite the Germans constantly trying to improve it, making it more complex, the Enigma was broken. And remarkably early on, actually, by Polish cryptanalysts.
Polish! How early are we talking?
Think December 1932. That's when Marian Rejewski made the first major breakthrough.
1932. Wow, that's well before the war even started.
It is. And that Polish achievement, the methods they figured out, the knowledge they gained, they shared it with the French and the British.
And that shared knowledge led to something big.
Hugely significant. It formed the basis for the Allied code-breaking efforts, particularly at Bletchley Park. The intelligence they got from cracking Enigma, codenamed Ultra, well, many historians believe it drastically shortened the war, maybe even changed the outcome.
That's incredible. So today we're going to dig into how this seemingly impenetrable machine worked, yes, but maybe more importantly,
How human ingenuity, just sheer brain power and critical thinking, found the flaws and brought it down.
exactly. Expect some real aha moments, but we'll keep it accessible, not too bogged down in the deep technical weeds. So let's start right at the beginning. Who actually invented the Enigma?
It was a German engineer, Arthur Sturbius. He developed the idea near the end of World War I.
Around 1918.
Yes. He and a business partner, E. Richard Ritter, got patents for a Cypher machine then. Their company, Sturbius and Ritter, started selling it commercially in 1923 under the brand name Enigma.
So it wasn't originally for the military, more for businesses.
That was the initial target market, yeah. Protecting commercial secrets, financial information, that sort of thing.
Did businesses actually use it much?
There was some commercial interest in the 20s, but it was really military and government organizations that saw the real potential. Several countries adopted it, but most famously, Nazi Germany, before and especially during World War II.
And it became critical for their military doctrine, particularly Blitzkrieg.
Absolutely critical. Blitzkrieg relied on speed, coordination, fast communication between tanks, planes, infantry.
Right, command and control.
Exactly. And that needed secure radio communication. The Enigma was portable enough, effective enough. It was the perfect tool for them to coordinate those rapid attacks without the enemy easily listening in.
Okay, let's lift the lid then. How did this thing actually work? What were the main parts?
Well, it was this interesting mix of mechanical and electrical systems. Mechanically, you had a keyboard, like a typewriter, a set of rotors, these discs on a spindle, a mechanism to make them turn step by step, and then a lamp board, a little light bulb for each letter of the alphabet.
So you press a key.
Right. Pressing a key closed an electrical circuit. Current flowed from the battery through an entry point into the stack of rotors.
And the rotors did the scrambling.
Yes. The internal wiring of each rotor, combined with their position, which changed, constantly, created a really complex, unique path for that electrical current for every single key
So
press.
the path was different each time.
Different each time. The current would then come out of the rotor stack, go through some more components we'll get to, and finally light up one specific lamp on the lamp board. That was your encrypted letter.
And you said the rotors moved.
Yes, that was key.
Oh.
Every time you pressed a key, at least one rotor, the one on the right, would rotate one step, like one click forward. This constant movement is what made it a polyalphabetic cipher. It meant the substitution rule wasn't fixed, kept changing, making it much, much harder to break than a simple code.
These rotors sound like the absolute heart of the machine. Tell us more about them. What were they like physically?
Think of a disc, maybe like a thick hockey puck, usually made of bakelite or some hard insulator.
Okay.
On one side, 26 spring-loaded pins, brass usually. On the other side, 26 flat metal contacts, arranged in circles, representing the alphabet A to Z.
Right.
When you stack these rotors on the spindle, the pins from one rotor would press against the contacts of the next one, making electrical connections.
And inside?
Inside, each rotor was a maze of wires, a specific, unique pattern connecting each pin on one side to a different contact on the other side. This internal wiring performed a simple substitution, like A goes to F, B goes to K, and so on, but a different jumble for each rotor.
So one rotor on its own just did a fixed scramble.
Correct. A simple substitution. But the cryptographic power came from using several rotors together, typically 3 or 4 in the military versions, and the fact that they moved. That interaction turned a simple scramble into something incredibly complex.
And you could set where these rotors started, their initial position.
Absolutely. That was a crucial part of the setup. Each rotor could be manually turned to one of 26 starting positions. There was a little finger wheel sticking out so the operator could adjust it.
How did they know which position it was in?
Each rotor had alphabet ring around its edge, like a tire with letters A through Z. You could see one letter on this ring through a little window on the machine's case. That showed its orientation.
Okay.
And importantly, later military Enigmas added another twist. You could adjust the position of this alphabet ring relative to the internal wiring of the rotor. This was called the ring stelling, or ring setting.
Ring set, so another layer of setup.
Exactly. It became a really important part of the daily key settings. Think of it like a secret offset for each rotor starting point. Added a lot more variability.
Okay, multiple rotors, adjustable starts, ring settings. How did they actually move the stepping motion?
Right, so the movement was crucial to avoid simple patterns. The rotor on the far right always stepped forward one position with every single key press. Always.
Okay, the rightmost one always moves. What about the others?
The others moved less often. It was controlled by notches on the rotors, usually on those alphabet rings we mentioned, and a mechanism with pawls, like little levers. This was called the turnover.
Turnover, like flipping something over.
Sort of. Imagine a notch on the ring of the right-hand rotor. As it turns, when that notch reaches a certain point, it engages a pawl.
Uh-huh.
And that pawl then pushes the rotor immediately to its left, making it step forward one position.
Ah, so it's like the odometer in a car. When one wheel hits 9 and goes to 0, it clicks the next wheel over.
That's a really good analogy. It's
Yeah.
very similar to that odometer principle.
Okay.
But the Enigma had a weird quirk called double stepping.
Double step.
Yeah, specifically in the 3-rotor machines. If the middle rotor was just about to be pushed by the right rotor's turnover notch, and the middle rotor itself was also in the position where its notch would trigger the leftmost rotor, something funny happened.
What was that?
The middle rotor would actually step forward on the next key press as well, so it moved twice in quick succession. It wasn't perfectly regular like an odometer.
Why does that matter?
It made the pattern of rotor movements less predictable. It increased the overall period of the machine, how many key presses, before the exact same sequence of rotor positions repeated. For 3 standard rotors, it was 26 times 26 times 26.
Which is?
17,576 positions. A pretty long cycle, especially since most messages weren't that long. Made predicting the internal state much harder.
That's incredibly intricate. Were there other key electrical parts? You mentioned an entry wheel and a reflector.
Yes. The entry wheel, or Eintrittsvolz, was fixed. It sat at one end and basically connected the keyboard electrics, or the plug board, if fitted, to the first moving rotor.
So just a connector.
Pretty much. Its internal wiring wasn't random like the rotors, but the code breakers, like Rajewski, still had to figure out how it was wired to understand the rest. Military Enigmas wired it straight, A to A, B to B, etc. Commercial ones followed the keyboard layout.
Okay. And the reflector, the Umkehrvalz. That sounds important.
It was a really defining feature. Patented. set Enigma apart from most other rotor machines back then, apart from the very first models. It sat at the far end, after the last rotor.
And its job.
Its job was to take the electrical signal coming out of the last rotor, pair up the 26 possible inputs, and send the current back through the rotors again.
Back through.
Yep, but via a completely different pathway.
So in, scramble, bounce off the reflector, scramble again on the way back out.
Exactly. And this design choice had two major consequences. One good, one bad.
Okay.
The good thing was it made Enigma self-reciprocal. If you set up two machines identically, typing ciphertext into one automatically gave you plain text out. No need for a separate encrypt-decrypt switch. Very convenient.
And the bad thing?
The bad thing, cryptographically speaking, was a major flaw. Because of how the reflector paired connections, a letter could never be encrypted as itself. A could never become A. B could never become B.
Ah, and that's a pattern codebreakers could look for.
A massive clue, a huge vulnerability they absolutely exploited later. And like the rotors, there were different reflector versions, some even rewirable on later machines, adding yet another setting to manage.
Wow. Okay, rotors, stepping, reflector. But we haven't really hit the plug board yet. That sounds like it added a serious amount of extra scrambling.
Oh, it really, really did. The Steckerbrett, the plug board. Introduced by the German Army around 1928, Navy followed soon after. It sat on the front panel, below the keys.
And it let you swap letters.
Exactly. Using little patch cables with plugs on each end. You could physically connect pairs of letter sockets. For example, plug A into J.
What did that do electrically?
It meant that before the electrical signal even entered the main rotor scrambling unit, if you pressed A, the current was rerouted as if you'd pressed J. And coming back out, if the rotors produced a J, it would be rerouted to light up the A lamp, and vice versa for J becoming A.
So it swapped letters both going in and coming out.
Precisely. And you could typically connect up to 10 pairs of letters like this, though 13 were possible. This swapping happened before and after the rotor scrambling.
How much complexity did that add?
Astronomically more. Even more than adding an extra rotor. With 10 pairs plugged in, the number of possible plugboard settings was around 150 trillion.
Trillion with a T.
That's right, 150 million. It just massively expanded the search space for anyone trying to break the code. And Enigma without a plugboard was, well, significantly easier to attack.
It's just staggering to think about breaking that. Did they have any, like, accessories for the Enigma, things to make it easier to use or more secure?
Yeah, a few things. There was the Schreibmax, which was a little printer attachment for some later models. It printed the output automatically, so you didn't need a second person just writing down the letters from the lamps.
Handy.
And the Fernlesedrent, a remote lamp panel, allowed someone else to read the output from a distance, maybe for extra security and command post or something.
Okay.
And later in the war, 1944, the Luftwaffe introduced something called the Uhr, the clock. It was basically a fancy plugboard switch with 40 pre-wired settings you could select, making it quicker to change than replugging all those cables and potentially adding more complexity again.
So this machine, rotors, complex stepping, reflector, this incredibly complex plug board, all these settings you could change daily. It really was a beast for its time.
Absolutely formidable.
Which brings us back to the main question. How on earth did anyone manage to break it?
Well, that story, the cracking of Enigma, is just one of the great triumphs of cryptanalysis. And it really starts, as we mentioned, in Poland, with Marian Rejewski.
Right, back in 1932.
Around then, yes. Rejewski was a mathematician at the Polish Cypher Bureau. He used some pretty advanced math for the time permutation theory and combined it with some, well, frankly, sloppy procedures the Germans were using initially.
Sloppy procedures, like mistakes.
Mistakes in how they set up the message keys, yes. And crucially, he also had help from French intelligence. They had a spy inside Germany, Hans Thilo Schmidt.
A spy?
Yeah, Schmidt provided the French with some actual German key lists from late 1932, and those lists included the plugboard settings for those days.
That must have been gold dust.
Absolutely critical. Rejewski used that intelligence plus intercepted Enigma messages to do something incredible. He figured out the internal wiring of the military Enigma rotors, something the Germans thought was impossible to know.
Just deduced it. Wow. So once they knew the wiring, could they read everything?
Not quite. Knowing the wiring was a massive step, but the daily settings, which rotors, their order, the ring settings, the plugboard connections, the starting positions, all that still changed every day.
Right.
But knowing the wiring allowed the Poles to build their own functioning replicas of the Enigma machine. They called them Enigma doubles.
They built their own copies.
Yes. Rejewski worked with two other brilliant mathematicians, Jerzy Rojewski and Henryk Zygalski. all recruited from university, specifically because they knew math and German.
So they had the machine, they knew the wiring. What next?
They developed techniques to attack the daily keys. They exploited rotor quirks. They built catalogs of rotor behaviors using a device Rogowski invented called a cyclometer.
Cyclometer.
Yeah.
Ah.
And Zygalski developed these special perforated sheets, Zygalski sheets, kind of a visual method to find rotor settings. And then the big one, the bomba.
The bomba. Sounds explosive.
It was, in terms of code-breaking power, another of Rogowski's inventions. It was an electromechanical machine, basically 6 Enigmas linked together, designed to rapidly test possible rotor settings for the day's key. By 1938, they had 6 bombas running.
So this machine automated finding the daily keys?
It automated a huge part of the search, yes. Looking for contradictions based on those procedural flaws we mentioned, narrowing down the possibilities dramatically. They were reading German messages quite successfully for several years.
But the Germans didn't stand still, right? They improved things.
They did. The big change came in December 1938. The Army and Air Force introduced 2 new rotors. So instead of choosing 3 rotors out of 3, they now chose 3 out of 5.
How much harder did that make it?
10 times harder, essentially. The existing Polish bombas just weren't fast enough anymore. They calculated they'd need 60 bombas, 10 times as many, to keep up.
Which they couldn't afford to build quickly enough.
Exactly. It was a major blow. They realized they couldn't continue alone.
So that led to the sharing you mentioned.
That was the catalyst. In late July 1939, just weeks before the invasion of Poland, they held a secret meeting near Warsaw, invited the French and the British intelligence services.
And told them everything.
Everything. They explained their methods, showed them the Zygalski sheets, revealed the design of the bomba, and even gave each delegation a working Polish-built Enigma replica.
That's just an incredible act of foresight and, well, desperation, maybe?
It was absolutely fundamental. Gordon Welshman, who ran Hut 6 at Bletchley Park, the Army and Air Force Enigma section, said flat out, Ultra would never have got off the ground without what they learned from the Poles then. It was the foundation for everything the British achieved later.
And Ultra was the code name for the intelligence coming out of Bletchley Park.
That's right. Building directly on that Polish foundation, the teams at Bletchley Park eventually decrypted vast amounts of Enigma traffic from all German services throughout the war. Ultra gave the Allies unprecedented insight into German plans and operations. It was a massive advantage.
So the breaking wasn't just about math, but also exploiting German mistakes.
Definitely. While the machine had that inherent flaw and no letter encrypts to itself, a lot of the success came down to German procedural errors. Operators choosing lazy message keys like AAA or girlfriend's initials.
Seriously?
Oh, yes. Failing to implement updates properly, captured key lists, captured machines. All these things helped the Allies, alongside the sheer brilliance of the codebreakers.
And different German groups use slightly different enigmas.
Yes, the Abwehr, German military intelligence, had versions, sometimes without plug boards, sometimes with different stepping. Dilly Knox at Bletchley famously broke the Abwehr Enigma in 1941. That was huge, too. Helped with breaking other Enigma keys and fed into the double-cross system, turning German spies.
It's just such a complex story of technology, math, espionage, and human error. Let's switch gears slightly. How did an ordinary German operator actually use this thing day to day? Sending a message.
Okay, so imagine you're the radio operator. First, you need today's key settings for your network. You get your list.
Right.
You physically set up the machine, but the correct rotors in the specified order, say rotors they 4. You turn the alphabet rings on each one to the correct number, like 15, 23, 26. Then you plug in the cables on the plug board according to the list, EJ, OYV, etc.
Meticulous setup.
Very. Then you type your plaintext message letter by letter. For each key press, a lamp lights up. That's your ciphertext letter. Your buddy next to you writes it down.
And the rotors click forward each time.
Exactly. Then you transmit that ciphertext, probably via Morse code.
And receiving.
The receiving operator sets up their Enigma with the exact same daily settings. They then type in the ciphertext they received. As they type, the lamps light up, but this time showing the original plaintext letters. Self-reciprocal magic.
Provided they both have the identical settings. How did they distribute these daily keys securely?
That was obviously critical. They were prepared centrally and distributed in advance, usually on printed lists, maybe monthly. Each list covered a specific network, say, a Luftwaffe bomber group or a U-boat fleet. These lists were called keys by the British codebreakers, often with code names.
And the Navy was more complex.
Oh yes, the Kriegsmarine procedures were much tougher, more secure generally. They used extra code books sometimes for instance, to convert common phrases into four-letter groups before encrypting with Enigma. And their key lists were handled super carefully, sometimes printed in water-soluble ink on special paper so they could be destroyed instantly if captured.
Wow. So what exactly was on one of these daily key lists? What settings did it specify?
A full daily key, the Schlüssel, defined everything adjustable. First, the wheel order, Wolfenlosch, which specific rotors to use and in which slots, left, middle, right. Second, the ring settings, Ringstellung, those offsets for the alphabet rings, one number for each rotor. Third, the plug connections, Steckerverbindungen, the list of letter pairs to connect on the plug board. Fourth, for the later machines with the changeable reflector, its specific wiring configuration. And finally, the basic starting position for the rotors, Grundstellung, the three letters everyone set their rotors to at the very start of the day before dealing with individual messages.
Could you paint a picture of what one entry might look like using that Luftwaffe example?
Sure. So for a given day, it might say, wheel order, 4 2 V ring settings, 15 23 26. Plugs, EJOY5AQ, KWFX MT PSLUBD, reflector, if applicable, IU ASDVGL, and so on. And then it would list indicator groups, ELSA, ZBW, VCJ, RXN. These were used for the message keys.
And every single operator on that network had to match all of that perfectly.
Absolutely. One rotor wrong, one ring setting off by one click, one plug swapped incorrectly, and the message would be garbage at the other end. The Germans calculated the total number of possible settings was astronomical quintillions, giving them immense confidence. They thought brute force, just trying every setting, was utterly impossible.
You mentioned indicator groups. What were they for? If everyone used the same daily settings, wouldn't messages be vulnerable?
Good point. That's exactly why they had indicator procedures. You couldn't just start every message with the rotors in the same Grundstellung position all day. Cryptanalysts would spot patterns fast.
So each message needed a unique start, like an initialization vector today.
Precisely. The idea was the sender would choose a random three-letter starting position just for that one message. Let's say WZA. Then they had to securely tell the receiver what WZA was.
How did they do that?
This is where those early procedural flaws came in. One early bad method was set rotors to the daily Grundstellen. Type your chosen message key, say WZA twice. So you type WZA, WZA. That encrypts to maybe THGPLM. You transmit THGPLM at the start of your message. Then you reset your rotors to WZA and encrypt the actual message content.
And the receiver?
Receiver sets rotors to the daily Grundstellung, types in THGPLM, sees WZA, WZA light up. They now know the message key is WZA, reset their rotors to that, and decrypt the rest of the message.
But typing the key twice, that seems like a giveaway.
A huge giveaway. The Poles realized the first and fourth letters of the indicator were encryptions of the same plaintext letter. Same for second and fifth, third and sixth. That relationship gave them a massive mathematical lever to attack the settings, especially the plug board. It was a critical early mistake.
So the very method meant to add security actually undermined it.
Exactly. They fixed it later with better procedures, like encrypting the random message key only once, using a different random starting position derived from indicator tables, but operator sloppiness, like picking easy keys, AAA, BBB, QWE, sometimes still caused problems. And as mentioned, the Navy had much more elaborate indicator systems using extra code books.
It's just fascinating how the human element interacts with the technology. Now, you mentioned different models. Enigma wasn't just one machine.
Not at all. It evolved. Started with commercial models in the early 20s. The Handels machine, the Schreibende Enigma, which printed, then the Glühlampe machine, models A and B, which used LANs but didn't have a reflector. You had to switch them manually between encrypt and decrypt.
Oh, okay.
Then came models C and D, which did have the reflector. Model D was sold internationally. Switzerland used a version called Model K. Japan used a Model T. There was even a rare 8-rotor printing version, Model H, used briefly at very high levels in Germany.
And then the military versions took over.
Right. The German Navy started modifying commercial designs around 1926 with their Funkschlüssel C. The big step was the Wehrmacht Enigma I, around 1930, adopted by the Army and later the Air Force. That's the one that introduced the crucial plug board.
Yeah.
Key later military models were the M3 from 1934, then the gradual increase in the number of available rotors, first 3 out of 5, then the Navy eventually had 3 out of 8 to choose from, and finally the M4, the 4-rotor version, brought in specifically for U-boats in 1942 because the Allies were having too much success reading the M3 traffic.
4 rotors. And how many were made in total, roughly?
Best estimates are around 40,000 Enigma machines of all types were constructed. A huge number.
40,000. What happened to them all after the war? Did they just disappear?
Well, interestingly, the Allies sold off a lot of captured Enigmas after the war to developing countries, mainly. And those countries often thought they were still secure because the story of Bletchley Park was kept secret for so long.
No way. They sold them thinking they were still good.
Yep. Today, of course, surviving Enigmas are incredibly valuable historical artifacts. You find them in museums all over the world, Deutsches Museum in Munich, Bletchley Park itself, the NSA's museum in the U.S., Poland, Canada.
And private collections, too, I imagine.
Oh, yes. They fetch huge prices at auction when they occasionally come up. There was even a theft of one from Bletchley Park back in 2000, though it was later recovered. People also build replicas, and there are lots of software simulators you can play with online.
It's amazing they went from top secret to museum pieces and collector's items. Did Enigma inspire other similar machines, competitors, or successors?
It definitely did.
Oh, yeah.
Once the British fully understood Enigma at Bletchley, they developed their own rotor cipher machine called Type X, which was actually very secure. The Germans considered it unbreakable.
Ironic.
Very. Type X even used ideas from some of Scherbius's original patents that the Germans hadn't implemented in Enigma. The U.S. also developed a rotor machine, the Sigma, sometimes called the M325. But while inspired by Enigma, these weren't identical copies. They had their own cryptographic designs.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main things you think people should take away from the whole Enigma saga?
I think there are two big things. First, the machine itself is incredibly clever for its time, this mix of mechanics and electricity aiming for unbreakable security through complexity and changing settings.
Right.
But second, and maybe more important, is that human ingenuity, starting with those Polish pioneers like Rejewski, found the cracks. They used math, exploited procedural weaknesses, collaborated, and persevered to break something that seemed unbreakable. And that success fundamentally changed World War II.
And if there's one key aha moment for our listeners,
It's that constant dance between technology and the human mind. Enigma shows us that no system, no matter how complex or intimidating it seems, is necessarily beyond understanding or challenge if you apply enough critical thinking, collaboration, and sheer persistence. It proves that vulnerabilities can exist in unexpected places. Technical flaws, yes, but also human procedures and errors.
that's a great point. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the enigmas of today? What systems do we trust implicitly now that future generations might look back on and see obvious flaws we're currently missing? Definitely food for thought.
It absolutely is. And look, if this discussion has piqued your interest, there's so much more out there. Read about the code breakers at Bletchley Park, amazing stories. Dive into the history of cryptography itself. Or even, if you get the chance, go see a real Enigma machine in a museum. There's something powerful about seeing the actual physical device that held so many secrets and shaped so much history.